Hello everyone, welcome to TSAT Nipuna live telecast program on corals and coral reef formation. So, in today's presentation we are going to learn about introduction to corals, types of corals, coral formation, definition of coral reefs, types of coral reefs, theories of coral reef formation and economic significance of coral reefs. So, to begin with, let us understand what are corals. Corals refers to the calcareous skeleton secreted by tiny cnidarians in the form of polyps belonging to class Anthozoa and Hydrozoa of phylum Cnidaria or Coelenterata. These corals are found in warm, clear and shallow waters in tropical oceans and seas. Some corals, however, are found in Arctic and temperate seas. And the corals, they exhibit diverse shapes and sizes. Some of the corals are solitary and are large in size. The polyps are large in size. Majority are colonial forms with very small polyps. Some corals are used as ornaments and jewelry, while some other corals, they grow into huge mounds, while others grow into large and branched colonies. So, here we can see the beautiful images of solitary polyp and colonial polyp. On the left hand side we can see the solitary polyp, that is Fungia fungitis, which is commonly known as mushroom coral. And on to the right we can see the image, beautiful image of colonial polyp, which is Manicina areolata, commonly known as rose coral. And in the next slide we can see the beautiful image of red coral, that is Corallium rubrum, and it is used in ornament and jewelry preparation. Now, we shift our attention to the types of corals. The corals may be classified into three categories. First, hydrozoan corals. These usually form huge mounds, and examples of hydrozoan corals include Millipora, which belongs to order Milliporina. Another example of hydrozoan corals is Stylaster of the order Stylasterina. Coming to the second type of coral, which is called as octocorallian corals. These corals actually belong to subclass Octocorallia of class Anthozoa. These corals are known as soft corals. Some examples of soft corals include Alcyonium of order Alcyonaceae. Another example of soft coral, Tubipora, belonging to order Stolonifera. Similarly, another example is Heliopora, belonging to order Cenothecalia. And the third type of coral is known as hexacorallian corals, which are the true or stony corals. Example of true or stony corals is Madrepora. And in this slide we can see brilliantly colored and beautiful images of hydrozoan corals. On to the left side we can see the image of Millipora alcicornis, and on the right we can see another hydrozoan coral, Stylaster species. And this slide shows the images, beautiful images of Anthozoan corals. This is the slide of image of Gorgonia species, which is commonly known as sea fan. And in this image we can see the Metridium species, which is commonly known as sea anemones. Anthozoan corals, that is flower animals, though they are appearing like tiny plants, they are actually the polyp corals, coral polyps. Now in this slide we can see the beautiful images of soft corals, that is octocorallian corals. This image is of Alcyonium species, which is commonly known as dead man's fingers. And on to the right we can see the image of Tubipora musica, which is commonly known as organ pipe coral. And in the next slide we can see the beautiful image of Madrepora species, which is commonly known as horn coral. And on to the right we can see the image of Heliopora species, which is commonly known as blue coral. So in this slide we can see a comparative observation of stony coral on the left and soft coral on the right. And coming to some more details of hydrozoan corals, they are colonial forms that secrete large amount of exoskeleton. It exhibits in two polypoid forms, namely gastrozoids and dactylozoids. Gastrozoids are individuals which are concerned with feeding, whereas dactylozoids are concerned with protection. These corals, that is hydrozoan corals, along with other corals, form huge mounds. And coming to the second type of corals, octocorallian corals, which includes colonial and soft corals, example order Alcyonaceae. Here the skeleton of these corals is in the form of calcareous red spicules. These spicules are red in color due to the presence of ferrous salts. They exhibit certain special characters like lateral platforms, vertical tubes that are partitioned by what are known as cross plates. These type of corals we can find in order Stolonifera. The coral axis with horny material, proteins, spicules forming red coral is useful in preparation of jewelry, belongs to order Gorgonacea. Now coming to the third type of coral, as I said earlier, they include true or stony colonial corals. These are the main builders or principal builders of coral reefs. And in this slide we can see two types of corals. One is hermaphroditic corals, where both male and female sex are present in the same individual. Examples of hermaphroditic corals include brain corals and star corals. And coming to gonochoric corals, that is, these corals are unisexual, either they may be male or female corals. Examples of gonochoric corals include elk horn corals and boulder corals. And coming to the coral formation, the fertilization is of external type, which results in the formation of zygote, and that develops into a free swimming ciliated planula which undergoes metamorphosis to form young coral polyp. We find some special structures called prototheca, basal plate, sclerosepta, which are secreted by coral polyp, epidermis and radial folds respectively. A thecal wall is built up around the polyp. In the next slide we can see the further skeleton is added between sclerosepta, which alternates with mesenteries of the polyp. Coral colony grows by budding of new polyps along the margins and on surface layers. Variety in compound corals is because of the different patterns of budding, and the coral polyps, they exhibit a sac-like body and a mouth that is encircled by tentacles which are bearing stinging cells called as nematocysts or nidae. The polyp builds cup-shaped calcareous skeleton to protect soft and delicate body. They are nocturnal forms. So in order to hide during daytime, they construct these cup-shaped skeletons which are made up of calcium carbonate. And in this image we can see the different parts of the polyp. Here we can see the mouth, and these are the tentacles, and these are the other structural details of the coral polyp. And the coral polyp exhibits clear bodies and white skeletons. Whatever the brilliant colors that we observe is due to the presence of a tiny algae, unicellular algae, which is known as zooxanthellae, which lives inside the gastrodermal cells. Such corals which are in association with zooxanthellae are known as hermatypic corals. So in this slide we can see a greenish color, yellow to green color, due to the presence of the tiny algae, that is zooxanthellae. And coming to the coral skeleton, the skeleton of single coral or solitary coral is known as corallite, whereas the skeleton of colonial coral is known as corallum. So that is the difference between corallite and corallum. Each corallite has a stony cup with a basal plate and a theca. Theca is the body wall. The cavity of the cup contains a number of vertical ridges which are called as sclerosepta. The inner ends of the sclerosepta fuse to form an irregular mass which is called columella. Now coming to the growth of the corals. The growth in corals takes place by continuous budding of new polyps. Buds arise from horizontal tubular interconnections or from polyps themselves. Consecutive layers of skeleton are secreted as new polyps are budded off and when polyps fully grow. The thecal rim and sclerosepta increase in height. The bottom of the cups, they are sealed by what are known as tabulae. The polyps are continuously pushed up. These corals grow fast when conditions are conducive and favorable, but they are vulnerable, they are susceptible to mortality or death due to various factors like increase in temperature, overgrowth of algae, or due to the action of predators. And coming to the forms of corals, there are two types of corals based on the growth and arrangement of polyps. These are known as solitary polyps and colonial polyps. Coming to the solitary polyps or individual polyps, they grow as isolated individuals, free living or attached, that is sessile, or sometimes both features can be observed. They are found in several shapes like round, oval or egg-shaped, or elongate, measuring about 0.5 to 25 centimeters, with numerous sclerosepta without theca. Examples of solitary polyps include fungia, caryophilia, and flabellum. The image of fungia we have seen a little ago. The colonial polyps are usually the stone corals. These forms, they are in the form of flower vases or flat plate-like structures. The polyps, which develop by sexual method, will give rise to colony by asexual method. The complex cushion-like or rounded masses can be observed in colonial forms. Examples of colonial polyps include star corals, brain coral, rose coral, etc. We can also see the colonial polyps in the form of dendritic forms or tree-like forms. Examples include acropora and dendrophilia. And in this slide we can see the beautiful images of star coral and the brain coral. And here we can see the image of acropora and dendrophilia. And now we shift our attention to another aspect of corals, that is fossil corals. We find two groups of corals that were fossils during Paleozoic era, found in sedimentary rocks. So these two categories of fossil corals are namely rugose corals and tabulate corals. In case of rugose corals, we find solitary and colonial forms, whereas in tabulate corals we find only colonial forms. And this is the beautiful image of rugose and tabulate corals. Both these groups were involved in the reef formation. These two groups became extinct at the end of Paleozoic era, after which the recent or modern reef building corals, that is scleractinians, they arose early in the Mesozoic era. The order Madreporiaria includes more than 6,000 fossil species of corals. Now let us understand what are coral reefs. According to Wayland Vaughan, he has defined coral reefs as a ridge or a mound of limestone, the upper surface of which is near the sea surface and which is formed of calcium carbonate by the actions of corals. So the reason for being near the upper surface is they require sunlight to permit zooxanthellae to carry out the photosynthetic activity. Coming to the types of coral reefs, we have three types of coral reefs, namely fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and atoll reefs. Fringing reefs are also known as shore reefs. These reefs take about 100 to 1000 years to form a fringing reef, whereas barrier reefs, they take about 2.5 million years to form into full-fledged barrier reefs. Similarly, the atoll reefs, which are also known as coral islands or lagoon islands, they take about 10 million years. So by this statistical facts, we can understand the coral reef formation is a very slow process. And in this slide, we can see the three types of coral reefs. Here, the eruption of a volcano is the initial stage, which is followed by the coral reef formation. Here, the reef, it fringes. It is very close to the shore of the landmass or island. And this is the image of the barrier reef. Here the barrier reef is similar to fringing reef, but with the presence of a deeper and wider water channel, which is called lagoon, with island in the middle. And this third type, that is atoll, is a ring-shaped coral reef without a island, rather lagoon in the center. Coming to the further details of fringing reefs, as I said earlier, these are also called as shore reefs. These reefs grow directly from the coastal line or shore as a narrow belt to the extent of 1 to 2 kilometers wide. These are located very close to the island and form shallow lagoons, which is about 50 to 100 meters deep between the beach and the main body of the reef. And fringing reefs are the most common type of coral reefs. And this is the beautiful image of fringing reef. And coming to the second type of coral reef, that is barrier reef. This is a little complex type of reef that is extensive and like a straight in the circular form parallel to the shoreline, and is separated from it by a relatively deeper and wider water channel called lagoon. So this is the largest of the three types of coral reefs that runs for hundreds of kilometers and is several kilometers wide. It extends as a broken irregular ring around the island. The famous example of barrier reef includes Great Barrier Reef of Australia. The barrier reef, this reef is 1 kilometer to 15 kilometers away from the shore. The second largest barrier reef is Indo-Pacific Barrier Reef, which is northeast of New Caledonia. It is about 400 miles long, and the lagoon in Barrier Reef is about 1 to 8 miles wide. And this is the beautiful image of the barrier reef. Here you can see the lagoon, and this is the barrier reef, and here you can see the land, the island. So you had a quick look of the Australian Great Barrier Reef, which is the world's largest barrier reef. The Australian Great Barrier Reef of Australia is about 1,200 miles long. And coming to the definition of lagoon, it is a wide band of water that lies between the shore and the main area of reef development and contains at least some deep portions. And coming to the third type of coral reefs, which is known as atolls. It is a ring-shaped or circular oceanic reef system surrounding a large and deep central lagoon, which is 70 to 90 kilometers in diameter. So from this value we can imagine how big a lagoon can be in case of atoll. The lagoon has a depth of about 80 to 150 meters and may be joined with seawater through a number of channels across the reef. And one such example of atoll is Maldives and Aldabra. In case of India, we have atoll at Lakshadweep Islands. And this is the beautiful image of the atoll coral reef. Now let us focus our attention on the theories which explain the formation of coral reefs. We have two theories, namely Darwin's subsidence theory and the second theory called Penck-Daly's glaciation control theory. Now coming to the first theory, that is Darwin's subsidence theory, all coral reefs are found in regions where subsidence of land has taken place. Here subsidence simply refers to sinking of land. Subsidence ante కుంగిపోవుట, ద్వీపము ఐలాండ్ అనేది కుంగిపోయేదాన్ని subsidence అంటాం. So initially the corals, they grew as fringing reefs surrounding the islands in shallow tropical sea. So the subsidence or sinking of islands commenced so that the fringing reef turned into barrier reef, separated from the island by a wide deep water channel or lagoon. The island, while sinking, became smaller and smaller and finally disappeared entirely beneath the ocean surface. And this is the animation of atoll formation, where you can see the island is subsiding or sinking and resulting in the formation of a very deep and wide lagoon. In the second theory, which is known as Penck-Daly's glaciation control theory, these are the two scientists who have proposed, rather explained, this glaciation control theory. The first one is Albrecht Penck and the second one is Reginald Aylesworth Daly. So during the glacial period or ice period, the ice caps formed, resulting in decrease of the ocean level by about 60 to 70 meters. And when the temperatures rose, the ice melted and the corals started to grow on the flat platform of the ocean bottom and kept pace with the rising levels of ocean, forming huge or gigantic reefs. Now coming to the economic importance of coral reefs. The coral reefs are regarded as hotspots of marine biodiversity. These are also known as rainforests of the sea. Coral reefs are important because they provide food for millions of organisms, especially the marine forms. The coral reefs are very useful because they protect the coastlines from the action of cyclones, storms and erosion. They provide habitat and shelter for many marine organisms like sponges, mollusks, echinoderms, fishes, etc. And the coral reefs, they serve as spawning and nursery grounds for commercially important fish species. Spawning is depositing or laying of eggs, and nurturing or rearing of those you can find abundantly in these coral reefs. So the coral reefs are also very important because they provide jobs and income to the local communities by various activities such as fishing, recreation and tourism. The coral reefs are also very important because they are a source of new medicines. The coral reefs may be useful as medicines to treat ulcers, cancers, HIV and cardiovascular diseases. The coral reefs are also important because of their decorative value. So Corallum rubrum, the red coral, is used in preparation of jewelry and ornaments. Now, you can see
today
the video.
We're going to explore the wonderful world of coral reefs. We will find them to be full of strange shapes, fascinating creatures and brilliant colors, like reds, blues, yellows, oranges, purples and greens. The landscape changes by the second because the reef inhabitants are constantly moving. They are filled with fish and many other strange animals that all have a role to play in keeping the reefs vibrant and alive. Coral reefs are second only to rainforests in the huge number of plants and animals that live there. They are gigantic communities of living things, all coexisting and thriving together. So, just what are coral reefs? Well, they're large underwater structures made of limestone, corals, algae, sponges, anemones, and so much more. Coral reefs are the oldest type of ecosystem in the world, and they've been around for more than 240 million years. An ecosystem is a community of plants and animals, along with the environment that they live in. Can you believe that these massive reef structures have been built over time by tiny animals that are about the size of an eraser on the end of a pencil? They are called coral polyps and are very small, soft-bodied animals that might look more like plants.
Now we have almost come to the end of the presentation. So from this topic we can expect certain short questions like what are corals, what is corallum, corallite, atoll, lagoon, fossil corals, etc. And essay type questions may be asked in this way, like define corals, explain the formation of corals and coral reefs. And you may also expect a question like, write an essay on corals, types of corals and coral reefs with a focus on economic importance. So, before we conclude, let us recap the important points we have discussed in today's presentation. So, corals are nothing but the skeletal structures which are deposited by the tiny animals in the form of polyps. They look like plants, but they are actually the exoskeletal deposits by the polyps. So, the polyps, individual polyps or solitary polyps, they grow and form into colonial corals or colonial forms. And these corals, these colonies, when they grow extensively, join with one another, they form into coral reefs in a bigger way. And these coral reefs, over a large period of time, results in the formation of coral islands or lagoon islands. So, in this way we can see the different stages of formation of corals, colonial forms, and the coral reef formation and the coral islands. So, if we look at the striking features of these forms, they exhibit symbiotic association between the polyps and the minute alga called as zooxanthellae. As I said earlier, it is a unicellular alga which imparts various colors due to its pigmentation. So, the association between this zooxanthellae and polyps is very interesting. They are win-win situation. They are mutually beneficial to one another. The zooxanthellae provides oxygen, provides food in the form of carbohydrates, and it cleans up the polyps by making use of the metabolic waste like carbon dioxide, etc., for preparation of starch during a process called photosynthesis. So, in this way the zooxanthellae is useful to the polyps, and the polyps are also getting equally benefited. And where we find these coral formation? In suitable conditions, like they should be close to the sea surface, and the coral reefs, they form near the sea surface in the tropical conditions, that is warm water at a temperature usually between 20 to 25, and they require sunlight so that the zooxanthellae can produce the food using photosynthetic process. So, we have learnt the different types of corals. There are solitary corals and colonial corals. We have seen what are soft corals and stony corals. Soft corals, they belong to subclass Octocoralia, whereas hard corals, or rather stony corals, the true corals, they belong to subclass Hexacoralia. And we have also seen the different types of coral reefs, that is fringing reef, then barrier reef, and the third form is the atoll reef. We actually have a few more like patch reefs, etc., but are of less significance. As I said earlier, in case of the fringing reef, the ridge, the reef forms immediately close to the shore with a narrow band of water which is shallow lagoon, whereas in case of barrier reef we come across a parallel barrier reef with a deeper and wider lagoon, unlike the fringing reef. The barrier reef is also called as the barrier reef is named as barrier because at certain shallow points the coral reefs, they reach the sea surface and it becomes difficult for the navigation to take place. So they become a barrier for navigation, and that is the reason why they are known as barrier reefs. And coming to the third type, that is the atoll reefs. As I said earlier, this is a ring type of coral reef which is surrounding the lagoons in the center. The island, it gradually disappears due to sinking of the islands, and to this coral reef formation to take place, it takes large amount of geological period. And to sum up, let us quickly recollect the economic importance of the corals and coral reefs. As I said earlier, they are very useful as hotspots of diversity, which are also called as rainforests of the sea. We find several species moving around these coral reefs due to the availability of conducive atmosphere and suitable place to flourish and lead a successful life. And in the present times, the coral reefs are facing the risk or threat of destruction due to various human activities. So with this we conclude today's presentation. Thank you for watching this program. Jai Hind.